All right, let's sort of dive into some real world code here. The most popular HTML tag by far is the div. Now the div, the div, which you can just see behind me here, is just a dummy element. It's just a divider. It's a block element, so it's going to take up as much width as possible, but with a little CSS, you can change its entire behavior. And again, it's the most popular one out there. It's just because there isn't an element for every single scenario, so sometimes you just need to nest things, sometimes you need to make a list of things, and sometimes you just need a div. It's just a very basic element, and we are going to be using a lot of these moving forward. And I actually want to dive into something with you right now. Let's open up imdb.com and let's just count the number of divs, and let's count the number of spans, and let's maybe count the number of links. And in a new tab, I'm going to go to imdb.com. And let's go right click, view page source, and let's do a find. So Command F or Control F, and I am simply looking for less than div, the opening tag. That's going to be hard to see on my screen, so I apologize about that, but we can see that there's one of 424 matches. That's pretty nuts. So there's 424 div elements in here. Let's go ahead and count the number of A tags. There are 256 A tags in here. Let's go ahead and count the number of spans. There are 104 span elements in here. Let's take a look at something else that looks popular. Input. We haven't learned about this yet, but we will eventually. Input. There are 3 input fields. Let's look at option. There are 6 option fields. Let's look at list items. Again, a lot of these we haven't learned about yet, but we will. There are 111 list items in here. So by far, so far, div is winning by over double, almost double. There's 424 divs in here. That's pretty crazy amount. And that's pretty normal, to be totally honest. So let's go ahead and explore what a div looks like. In here, I just have div.html. I've already gone ahead and created this file and added my doc type in HTML and my page structure. And I'm simply going to type div, a div in here, and I'm going to put a second div in here. So I just made 2 divs, and in Firefox, I'm going to open this up, div.html, and we can see we have 1 div here, and we've got a second div there. Now you might be wondering at this point, what's the difference between a div and a paragraph? Well, a paragraph has a little extra padding, a little extra margin around it, if you will. So extra spacing here, and extra spacing here, number 2. Refresh the page and you can see there's spacing between these two, and there is not with a div. So a paragraph just comes with that extra spacing, assuming that you're going to be writing something content related because you're putting it in a paragraph. Not everything belongs in a paragraph. Even though we've been using them to death so far, not everything belongs in a paragraph. The next thing is you can't actually nest a paragraph. So you're not supposed to put a paragraph inside of a paragraph. This is something we haven't talked about, the paragraph paradigm, but this is not nestable. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So it looks like it's totally fine, but when we inspect our element, we can actually see that extra spacing in here is just regular text, and we put a paragraph inside of it, so we should have a paragraph inside of a paragraph with text that says this is not nestable. And would you look at that? It actually broke out of its parent paragraph. So these are not nestable. Whereas with a div, you can nest as many divs as you like. And this is what a nested div is going to look like. So let's put a div here, let's put a div here, let's put a div here, let's put a div here. Ultra nested div, it's the most nested div of all. So let's refresh and we see ultra nested div, no big deal. But in our browser, the browser actually says, oh, there's a div inside of a div. Oh, a div inside of a div. Oh, and there's another one. Oh, wow, it just keeps going. And so we can do this with divs, but we can't do it with a paragraph. And nesting is incredibly important when it comes to HTML, especially when you start creating more complicated websites. Now, the other thing to know about a div element is, again, they are block elements. This is a block element, and it takes up the entire width. So sort of going along with the styling that we were doing before, let's add border 1 pixel solid red, and we can see it takes up all this width. But if we did the same thing with a span, style is equal to border 1 pixel solid red. And again, you do not need to know this part. That CSS, that comes after HTML. This is a span. So let's see the difference here. So this is a span. We could even do this again. Let's put these sort of all on the same line here. Block element takes up all the width and spans are side by side. And so a div really is just your dummy element. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that you want to create some sort of divider and maybe put some content in it, maybe put another div, maybe put a paragraph inside of it. Yeah, you can put paragraphs inside of divs. In fact, let's take a look at that. We have a div here, paragraph in a div. And now let's look at the opposite, where we put a div in a paragraph, div in a paragraph. And watch this actually break. We refresh, inspect our element, and in our body we have a div, and we've got a paragraph in it. So paragraph inside of a div. And I'll just make that a little better, a little bigger. And in here we have an empty paragraph, which we did not write, an empty paragraph after, which we also did not write, and a div that does not live inside of any paragraph at all. So a paragraph does not allow nesting of other block elements like this, at least not the div, but a div does. And so you're going to see a lot more divs in the future. You're going to see them all over the place. And just like the IMDb website, if you open up Facebook or if you open up your inspect tool with Google or any website, you're going to see tons of divs. They're all over the place. Your task for this particular video is going to be create a new .html file. And then I want you to create one div, then 2 spans, then 1 div, then 3 spans. And so it should look something along these lines. You've got a div with, I don't know, maybe some text in here. Text in here. And then you have 2 spans. So you're going to want to do a span 1, and then you're going to want to add another div and then add a few more spans. And then when you're done that, save your file as div.html, open it up in your browser, and just take note on how a span acts versus how a div acts. Spans you can put side by side, but a div you cannot.